Alright guys, welcome to how to structure your meals. Now in today's video, we are going to cover the fundamental basics that you can start implementing right away. We will get into the specific foods and what to exactly eat later on, but in this video, we're just going to cover the basics that must be mastered first. So the number one rule that everyone, no matter what gender, what shape or size you are, is that you have to include carbs and quality proteins in every meal. Why? Because in order to support a healthy metabolic function such as energy levels, thyroid, your focus, your output, you need to keep your blood sugar balanced. If your blood sugar is not balanced, that is a major stress on the body because your body is always running, it's always functioning. And if your blood sugar is not regulated, your body is not getting the energy it needs. And so a bunch of backup systems kind of kick in, which are not ideal. And you have to eat these macronutrients together in every meal to avoid harsh fluctuations in your glucose levels. So the reason why proteins and carbs are so important in this function is because meat specifically will lower your blood sugar sometimes, specifically eggs and beef liver. And how this happens is it triggers a hormone response, and so the insulin in your body gets triggered and the insulin will lower the blood sugar levels. And then conversely, simple sugars will spike your blood sugar, especially if they're eaten by themselves. And I think that's why, simple sugars get a bad rep because, if you eat them alone, they can spike your blood sugar. Whereas, complex carbs like oatmeal, quinoa, stuff like that, that comes with more fibrous material and it takes longer to break down. However, that doesn't mean I'm on board with complex carbs completely. I think with the fibers that it comes with, it can cause more inflammation depending on how sensitive your stomach is, and that's something we'll get into in the later weeks. But simple sugars are definitely not the bad guy here, especially if you're eating them with proteins. Now, finding your ideal macros. We actually don't recommend counting your macros long term. If this is something you want to do for a short while just to get a better understanding of exactly what you're eating, that's totally fine. However, don't think this is necessary. If you want to count your macros, we think that counting your protein macros are really the only thing that's necessary because most of the time people are grossly under eating their proteins and actually need way more than they originally thought. So what is your ideal ratio? So as entrepreneurs, we don't recommend counting calories and macros. However, you should be aware of your ideal ratios. Everyone has their own individual blueprint with what macronutrients work better with their system. Now, what I mean by this is some people do better on a higher carb diet and some people do better on a higher fat diet. And the best way to know that is if you feel a headache or chronic thirst or urination or lightheadedness after your meals, your blood sugar is too high, introduce more proteins next time to counteract this. And I think the biggest thing most people notice is chronic thirst. So if you have a big meal and you had too much sugar, you're gonna feel really, really thirsty afterwards. And the reason being is because your body is trying to flush out that extra glucose. So your kidneys, your whole system is working extra hard to basically balance your blood sugar. And then if you feel sluggish or fatigued, lack of energy after your meals, your blood sugar is too low. So introduce some simple sugars like fruit. Fruit is a great option. Fruit juice, honey, maple syrup, dark chocolate, things like that that are easy to digest and can get your blood sugar back up to a regular level. Now, with entrepreneurs, this is something that's really important to keep in mind because each macronutrient has different functions. Fat is primarily used for the nervous function, so nervous system, brain function. Proteins are the building blocks, so they are actually building the structure of your body, so your nails, your skin, your hair, collagen, stuff like that. And then carbs are used as the energy source. Now, when it comes to properly getting the amount of energy you need for that day, it's important to look at your activity level. So carbs are the energy source for your body, for your cell. Glucose is a preferred energy source. Now, when it comes down to that, you want to make sure you're not eating too many carbs, especially as an entrepreneur where you are sedentary most of the day. Now, of course, you might still be going to the gym for an hour or two, but that's a lot different than, let's say, a labor worker who is literally on their feet, busting their ass for 8 hours. They're gonna need a lot more carbs than you are. And so for this reason, I recommend on your days that you're resting, that you don't go to the gym, or maybe you have like a low activity day, to up your protein. And then on your high activity day, the days where you are going to the gym and you're lifting heavy, I recommend upping your carb intake for that day. And then diet philosophy. So this is a huge topic in the media. There's so many, opinions and studies out there. It's just complete information overload. People don't really know what to listen to. And for this reason, nutrition specifically and the relationship, the biochemical relationship between your body and the foods you eat are so complex that I truly don't think we fully understand the complexities within it. And so that's for that reason, there's a couple things that we kind of stand by. And so we don't like cutting out a whole macronutrient, and we'll get into this in the next couple slides. So why we don't believe in the ketogenic diet. Glucose is the primary and preferred source of energy for the cell. Your liver and the cells in your retina run exclusively on glucose. That means these cells have to go through extra steps to break down the extra fat in order to get that glucose, because you're not getting it in your diet. And your body can turn fats and proteins into glucose, but that is your backup system needed in the case of survival. This is the difference between surviving and thriving. The function of taking proteins and fats and turning it into carbs for energy is extra steps and stress on the body. Business owners are already stressed out as it is. We never recommend restricting carbs because of this. Now, a lot of people might, argue like back in the day, like our ancestors, they didn't have access to as many carbs, and so they were eating more proteins and more fats. And yes, this probably worked great for them, but we cannot compare ourselves to our ancestors. Because even though physiologically and anatomically we are basically the same still, our environments are completely different. They're not sitting in traffic, running late to work. They're not, training new hires and putting out fires in their business. They're not dealing with maybe, marital problems within their relationship. There's so many different environmental stressors that we're dealing with. And that's not even including, environmental mold or EMFs or fumes or basically any other stressors that come, post industrial revolution. And so with that being said, we have way more stress, put on our bodies than they do back then. The only really stressor they had to worry about was mating and finding food. Now, why we don't believe in the vegan diet. This one, it's because you're missing over 15 essential nutrients needed for overall health and minimizing stress. So this includes vitamin A in the form of retinol, K2, CoQ10, D3, B12, B6, creatine, carnitine, taurine, cholesterol, and heme iron. There's a lot of confusion surrounding this topic of what nutrients are essential and non-essential. Items like retinol, for example. So vitamin A, even though something is labeled as vitamin A, there are different forms. Beta carotene and then retinol. Beta carotene actually cannot be synthesized into retinol, which is the body's preferred source. Now, this is just one example of the many relationships between all of the vitamins and nutrients, but a lot of the times it's not as simple as just, I need vitamin A, because there's specific forms that your body actually needs. Another one is humans cannot digest cellulose, the outer membrane of the plant cell material. So too much plant fiber can irritate and inflame the gut, leading to IBS, Crohn's disease, and a bunch of other GI issues. And then cholesterol found in animal products is needed for optimal brain and nervous function. And then the vegan diet is not fit for all life stages, and this includes infancy to the elderly. And the reason being is because when you have a newborn, you cannot feed them the vegan diet. They need proteins, they need amino acids, they need these essential nutrients to build a healthy, growing body. Now, why we don't believe in the carnivore diet. So too much red meat from a grained animal can be extremely inflammatory when eaten in large quantities. Otherwise, always buying grass-fed can be expensive. So we totally understand that sometimes, buying all grass-fed can be expensive. That is the one downside of that. But in the long-term game, it is definitely better for your health, because grain-fed animals actually, if you look at their, metabolic profile and their nutrients, they have way more inflammatory omega-6s. So there is a vast difference in the actual structure of the meat. And the grass-fed has more nutrients. It has more omega-3s, which is the lesser inflammatory fatty acid. And then you also need some fiber in your diet, specifically root vegetable fiber. This can be beneficial in removing endotoxins and recycled estrogen from the gut. Now, we're gonna go way deeper into the health of the gut and the microbiome in later weeks, but this is just kind of like a little snippet, because your gut can develop endotoxins, and it can start building up extra estrogen, which kind of cycles within your gut. So it's really important to have some fiber. However, I will say with the vegan diet and a lot of these other mainstream media diets, I feel like they overconsume fiber, which can be very, very damaging to your internal gut. So finding the right balance for you is key here. And then, like the ketogenic diet, you are lacking beneficial and pro-metabolic carbs such as honey, fruit, and grass-fed dairy. Now, this is the process called gluconeogenesis, and then I'll show you really quickly. Basically, the process of gluconeogenesis is when you are taking proteins and the body does some extra steps and it turns it into carbs, specifically for your eyes and your liver. These two right here run specifically on glucose. So your body must go through these extra steps. Your brain can run on ketones, yes, but these two items, which are very important, run specifically on glucose. And so your body has to go through extra steps. Now, imagine being an individual that has to go through traffic every day. You are having issues with your relationship. Let's say you have to train, new hires in your business, and that's going to shit. All of these things are going to be causing external stress. So why would you want to add more stress to the body by making it go through extra steps and turning, proteins into carbs? Why not just give your body the carbs in the very beginning? And lastly, quality is extremely important when buying meat. Grain-fed or sick animals have higher PUFAs, and omega-6 levels becoming very inflammatory. So omega-6s and PUFAs, these are both fatty acids. PUFAs stand for polyunsaturated fatty acids. Now these both are something you want to avoid like the plague. Omega-6s, you just want a balanced ratio with omega-3s, but PUFAs, I would recommend avoiding those at all costs. And this is something we will dive way deeper into later on in the weeks. Now, you might be asking, what do we believe in? If we don't believe in the ketogenic diet, the vegan diet, the carnivore diet, what we believe in is our winning food philosophy. Now, we believe in a nutrient-dense, animal-based foods. So getting in high-quality proteins, not cutting out, any macronutrients. We believe in keeping our plate ancestral and balanced. This is needed for proper gut healing, nutrient absorption, and lowering stress demands on the body. We do not recommend restricting a whole macronutrient. We focus on micronutrients to ensure the body's demands are met and for optimal health and immunity against pathogens and daily stressors. A big thing that we are going to get into later on is a lot of people, especially if you have a body composition goal in mind, just focus on the macronutrients. If it fits my macros, they can have the freaking Pop-Tart diet. But what's even more important are the micronutrients, because that is actually what is holding your body together. That is what is making everything function. That is also, the reason why a lot of people have cravings, and we'll get into that later on, but the cravings are mistaken as, only from like junk food or addiction, but really it boils down to your body isn't getting what it needs, and so it's just reaching out for anything. But the biggest thing to keep in mind is that you need to do what works for you, and I cannot scream this enough, because a lot of the times people go on the internet, they see their favorite YouTuber, they see their favorite bodybuilder, and they just want what they have, and so they replicate them. And this is very, very destructive to the body, because none of us are the same. Even your brother or your sister, we all have very complex, different metabolisms. We have different microbiomes. What works for me might not work for you. And that's why it's really important to actually understand your body, understand the key points, understand the cues that your body is trying to tell you. And this is something we are going to teach you so that you can actually be self-sufficient and finally being able to read your body and give it what it wants. Now, to get into a little bit of the macronutrients, we're going to get into carbs first. So carbohydrates, which convert to glucose, are the primary source of the cell. We already kind of went over this. Think of carbs for the body as gasoline is for the car. There are two main types, simple and complex. Simple carbs, also called simple sugars, should not be eaten alone. They are a cleaner energy source, and they include fruit, honey, pure cane sugar, and also maple syrup, just for some examples. And complex carbs are slowly digested. They can be eaten alone. They are often more inflammatory, and these include oatmeal, quinoa, beans, and wheat, and they are not a good source of energy. Now, I wanted to include a little myth for you guys. So the biggest myth I see around carbs is simple carbs are bad, carbs cause inflammation, all sugar is bad for you. The truth behind that is that real sugar is not bad for you. For example, cane sugar, the sugar in fruit, maple syrup, honey. These are all things you can find in nature that our bodies, our ancestors evolutionarily grew up on. Sugar gets a bad name because of the man-made sugars like high fructose corn syrup and artificial sweeteners, which are known to be carcinogenic. They cause tumors, they can cause brain impairments, and we will go more over this on the superfoods module. Simple sugars get a bad name because people eat them by themselves, causing a blood sugar spike. They are very healing for your body when eaten with protein, never by themselves. So a fun fact is, have you ever craved sweets or carbs when you are stressed? It's because when you are stressed, your energy demands go up, and when you need more energy, your cells need more glucose, causing sugar cravings. Guys, I know this might sound like a lot of people paint this as addiction, like once you have sugar, you are addicted, but really you're just finally giving your body what it needs. And you have this misconception that sugar is bad for you, and so you try and cut down on it, you try and restrict it, but really that's just causing more damage because your body needs sugar to run off that. Now, I'm not advocating that you go run out and buy a bunch of candy bars. That has a ton of fillers with it, a ton of additives. What I'm recommending is enjoying fruit and, enjoying honey and maple syrup on your yogurt, having like protein pancakes, things like these that are really not bad for you and can be beneficial. And then proteins. So proteins, think of them as the building blocks or the foundation for all tissue repair. Protein controls the quality of your skin, your joints, muscles, and so on. You should get your protein from a variety of sources to include all amino acid absorption. It's really important to get your proteins from different sources, not just eating red meat every day. We really recommend to get, proteins from seafood, from eggs, red meat, and collagen and gelatin, which this includes collagen in your coffee. You can make, healthy gummy bears with gelatin. It's basically just a gelatin powder, water, and then fruit juice. And that's actually very beneficial because of the amino acids in the gelatin. And the reason why this is so important is because if we go back to the board, basically you have 21 amino acids. Red meat will only have maybe 20 of those. Seafood will only maybe have, 15 of those. And that's why you are missing a couple of those in each, and that's why it's really important to have them together in a variety of meals throughout the week. Now, you don't have to have a balanced, meal every single meal, but within that, weekly or bi-weekly window, I recommend to getting a variety of proteins. And the myth on meat is that it causes cancer. Red meat should be eliminated or avoided or reduced. I see a lot of that. Now, the truth is that meat itself does not cause cancer. Meat with added hormones, preservatives, such as nitrates and antibiotics, can cause colon cancer. Meat, also overcooked, specifically charred, is also a carcinogen. Now, I have never seen a study proving that grass-fed, lightly cooked red meat can cause cancer. So if you can find a study, definitely, name it in the Facebook group, but I myself have never seen a study proving that. They have always been studies with people who have already, not ideal lifestyles. These are people who are eating the lowest quality of meat, and they're also, including their lifestyles, they could be a smoker, they could be a drinker. So there are many errors within these studies, and that's why it's so important to see what works for your body and to be, N1, anecdotal, listen to your body. So another fun fact about, protein deficiency is a low hydrochloric level stomach in your acid. Humans have a very acidic level of a 1.5 pH. No living organisms should get through the first barrier of protection. If someone gets food poisoning from salmonella, for example, it is not the salmonella. It is from not having strong enough stomach acid levels to kill off that pathogen. So eating ample amounts of protein is required to basically prevent this. Now, fat. Fats can be used as energy in the body as well as a carrier for essential nutrients and provides some structural support. The fat in our body is primarily saturated fat. Our brain is 60% cholesterol and saturated fat. You need cholesterol for all sex hormones, and our cell membranes are made out of saturated fat. So, circling back to the vegan diet, another thing that's really important to keep in mind is when you are on a vegan diet, you are basically getting no cholesterol. So, imagine being vegan, you are getting no cholesterol. And what happens when you get no cholesterol? Your body, your liver has to work extra hard in order to make that. And some people might argue that cholesterol is not essential because your body can make it, but with how many functions cholesterol has within the body, I would highly argue that. Why would you want to make the body work harder to do something when you can just give it to your body and make it so much easier on the functions that have to create it? You know, a lot of vegans, they lose their periods, they lose their sex drives because they are not getting cholesterol, which is needed to be as a sex hormone. So when you are looking at the relationship between proteins, fats, and macros, it's important to understand their roles within the body. So if you have a brick building and you were laying down the brick, and this is what it looked like, and this was like a really bad, if this was a wall, this would definitely fall over. But basically, these are the proteins. The fat and the cholesterol are the glue right here that bind these together. They help the nervous function, they help the brain, and then let's say carbs is the person building this wall. They are the one that is making everything work. So if you eliminate carbs, your body has to go through extra steps in order to build this wall. And that's why it's really important, especially if your body is already under stress, to just not do this at all and just give the body what it wants, which is this little worker that is making everything function properly. Now, another myth with fats is too much dietary cholesterol is the cause of heart disease and plaque buildup in the arterial walls. The actual truth behind this is dietary cholesterol does not cause heart disease. Heart disease happens when your body becomes inflamed from certain harmful lifestyle choices. This could be smoking, obesity, iron overload, basically anything inflammatory. Cholesterol, using its structural component, just like the brick thing I showed you, comes to the arterial wall to plug up the little holes of irritation and help it heal. So another metaphor to basically get this point across is if you have a fire, for example. If you have a fire and you have firefighters that come and they come and put out this fire, they're the first responders, they're the first ones to show up. Are they the one that caused this fire? No, they're not. They're there, they came to put out the fire. The same thing applies with cholesterol and heart disease, because if you have a vein and you are inflamed and the walls are inflamed and they need to be healed, cholesterol is going to come and it's going to patch up the lining of this. It's going to help heal it. Now, cholesterol isn't the reason why it's there. It's there because of other outside factors. So like smoking, obesity, iron overload, all these other things that have nothing to do with dietary fat. Now, the way to get rid of this is to fix your lifestyle. It's not to lower your fat, because basically lowering your fat is going to starve this Band-Aid that comes to help fix it, which causes more issues. So what you want to actually do is remove the smoking, lose weight, become not obese anymore, reduce the iron overload, and then over time your heart disease should go down. So hopefully that made sense. Another fun fact is in the 50s and 60s, the big sugar industry financed studies saying that fat was the culprit of obesity and heart disease. Ever since then, fat has gotten the blame, and now all trending foods say fat-free, low fat, saturated animal fat is extremely good for you. Never go for fat-free products. If anything, go for full fat. Another example of this is if you go into the farming community. They actually talk about this and how when you have a cow, just pretend this is a cow, in order to fatten up this animal, they tried giving them fat, because that makes sense, right? Fat will make you fat. And what actually happened is this animal lost weight. It was no longer fat. And so what they had to do was, instead of feeding them fat, they actually fed them grains. And that's what made them fat. It wasn't this. It was this. It's actually the inflammatory grains such as soy and corn, which is basically in everything. So when it comes to fat, the best options are coconut oil, saturated fats. These are the best things for you, because if you look at the, rate of obesity, if you look at the graph of obesity, basically it is going up, obviously. Here's 2020. And if you look at the level of saturated fat, such as animal fat, butters, they are all going down, because what replaced them was actually vegetable oils. So if you look at the linear pathway of obesity and the usage of vegetable oils, such as margarine, canola oil, soy oil, all of these things, some people might argue that it's actually not from animal fat and butter. It's actually from the fake butter, the fake animal fat, and all the vegetable oils and PUFAs. Now, the last thing on this list is coffee. So a lot of you guys I know are coffee drinkers, and there are many, many opinions on the topic of coffee. And what I really think it boils down to is you as an individual. I know, people like Alex Becker, they came out with some YouTube videos regarding caffeine and how it's, awful for you. That might just be his story, and it really depends on how you feel. I think there's a couple of factors that should play into this when you decide if you should have coffee or not. So the factors are, if you are dependent on coffee, meaning that you wake up and when you wake up you cannot get any energy until you have caffeine, it's probably better to look at the root cause of why. Are you looking at your sleep? Are you looking at your nutrition? Are you looking at your exercise levels? These are all things, your hormonal levels, these are all things that should be addressed before becoming dependent on coffee. Now, I also recommend to never have coffee on an empty stomach for a couple reasons, just because this messes with your hunger signals and then also your pH balance of your stomach. So if you have an empty stomach, let's say you're intermittent fasting in the morning and you have black coffee on an empty stomach, this will mess up your pH balance over long periods of time. And how this happens is when you're hungry and you have nothing in your stomach, but then you have a cup of coffee, your stomach sees this as not food, obviously, and so it lowers your stomach acid level over time, because the acid you need to digest that coffee is extremely low. So your body adapts to that, because why would your body make stronger acid if it doesn't need it? So that's what happens over time when you have, black coffee on an empty stomach. That's why I recommend to have coffee with cream and sugar, and I put collagen powder in mine for those extra amino acids. And I always have it with my breakfast or afterwards. And intermittent fasting is another topic we'll get into. We actually at Peak Performance, that is something we are getting away from. We actually don't agree with the intermittent fasting movement anymore. We're going to have a whole module basically discussing why. And then also having a caffeine curfew is absolutely key here. So nothing later than noon we recommend. And then having 1 to 2 cups per day is within range. So 1 to 2 is totally fine, but if you need more than that, or if you're reaching for the whole pot, we definitely recommend not doing that. So either making half a pot or buying an espresso machine that only gives you, 1 to 2 cups. And then we also recommend to do espresso rather than drip coffee, because espresso is easier for the body to digest. It has less caffeine in there, but it still gives you the fulfillment of having a full cup, if that makes sense. So in summary, you have to find your individual macros, also having proteins and carbs in each meal. On lower activity days, up your protein. Never cut out a whole macronutrient to avoid extra stress on the body, which we already have enough of through business, through work, anything like that. And eating the right fats and proteins. These are not the bad guys if you're eating the right kinds, which we'll get into in the superfoods module. And then never having coffee on an empty stomach. All right, I'll see you guys in the next module.